Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me in another of my monologues. Today, I want to talk about books because yesterday I typed the words "the" and "end" on my Biggleswick story, The Town That Wouldn't Comply, which is a book that has lots of truth bombs in it within the fictional story, which I hope will remind perhaps those people in the freedom and truth movement of some of the things that we often discuss on channels like this, some of the things that we're trying to achieve, and also introduce to newbie people who are beginning to become aware that things aren't quite right in the world, of some of those things. And wrapped up in a fictional story is, I think, a great way to introduce certain ideas, because at the end of the day you can turn around, they can say, well, it's just fiction, isn't it? But sometimes they may find that certain parts of that fiction seems more real than real life. They may start to understand that councils are corporations, that the council tax is a fraudulent tax, and that the name is all in capital letters and things. You know, you introduce these things within the story, and it gives people a chance to think, doesn't it? It gives them a chance to sort of go, oh, I wonder if that's true. But because it's fiction, it can soften the blow, I suppose, rather than saying, this is a fact, and if you don't believe it, you're a nutter, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so I'm very pleased to have got to the end. I've now got to write what they call the preface, which, or you might call it the author's note, I suppose. I think I may well stick for preface, because I want this to be a fairly traditional look and feel to the book. And on that note, I wanted to ask some questions of you, the lovely audience. Now, I know I did a poll on the channel recently on the community tab to ask whether you preferred to read a book or an audio book. And the average score that came back was 66% roughly said that they would prefer a physical book in their hand. And 33% said they didn't read, but they like to listen to audiobooks. My fear with audiobooks is people start it, and then they fall asleep. You know, they do them at bedtime and then they doze off. And that's not necessarily to say the book was boring or anything, but it's just at the end of the day, you know, a voice can send you on to snooze. So anyway, but people can conveniently listen on their journey to work, in the car, whilst they're cooking, and that sort of thing. So I think that's interesting. Now, most people these days, and the debates that I've had with people, is that they'll put their book on a place like Amazon, which is a large corporation and is a bit like the supermarkets. When they come to a market town, they do seem to push everybody else out, don't they? And Amazon seems to have done that. It basically has destroyed the small street town second-hand bookshop market, because everybody does it online. And to me, that is unforgivable. There is nothing more pleasurable in life, in my opinion, than going into a second-hand bookshop. Of course, people are going to disagree with this because they don't want to do that, and that's fine. They have other things. But to me, you know, to a fisherman, there's nothing better in life than to sit on the bank and fish. You know, to a mechanic, there may be nothing better than life than stripping down a classic car or whatever it is. Of course, I'm not saying that my values are your values by any means. Of course not. But that for me, there is nothing more fun than walking into a second-hand book and discovering books, previously owned books that have been loved and for whatever reason have left their owner and they're now on a shelf ready for another owner. And sometimes you open up a second-hand book in a second-hand bookshop and there's a bus ticket or a photograph or a shopping list or a letter, all sorts of things that people have used as bookmarks, forgotten about, and a little bit of that reader has travelled with the book, and there's this amazing osmosis between the original writer, the publisher, the object, the book, and then the reader who reads it, and somehow there's that sort of almost unique, bespoke package, and I think that's absolutely brilliant. But places like Amazon, with their ability to second-hand books online, have decimated all that. Well, more than decimated, obliterated. It's very rare now to find a second-hand bookshop anywhere that other than just sells fiction, you know, classic, not classic, not classic, what I'm talking about, your normal supermarket fiction stuff. You know, your Jilly Coopers and your... You know what I mean. You're sort of what was the chap that kind of Frederick Forsyth and all of those. No, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with all of those novels. Of course, they're very popular, but that's what I mean, the popular stuff. But going into a second-hand bookshop and you see some hardback copies from 100 years ago, in the 1930s stories and information hardbacks, and even older, old dictionaries, old this, old that. Absolutely, gems, priceless gems, really, that mean a lot to a lot of different people. Books that are no longer published and haven't been published for a long time, which have certain information in. Anyway, all of that, I think, is lovely. So my question then, sorry, I'm rambling a bit today, and I apologise if the focus goes in and out. I don't know quite what's the matter with this camera, but the focus does seem to go in and out if I look away. But anyway, so I wrote a kid's book 10 years ago called Splidge the Cragflinger. It's still available. And I wrote 3 of those. It was a trilogy. And the first one, I didn't want to put it on Amazon. And I had them printed. And I had printed 750 of them. And I was going into schools, so I had to pay up front, and this was a company that would do them, which is all very nice, just similar to the online ones that you can buy, the print on demand. And there probably was a company that basically had the same equipment, I imagine. But yeah, that was very successful. 750 of those. I was going into schools at the time, helping children to learn to write. Not that I'm claiming to be a great writer myself, but I was asked to go in. And kids were able to buy a copy of this because I had printed 750 of them, and it meant that per unit they came down to a good price for me and a good price for the kids. So that was really good. And we sold quite a few of those. I've still got some left, because the trouble is when you print books and they deliver them to you, they come in boxes and you've got to store them. 750 books is quite a few boxes, I can tell you. The second book, which is called The Purple Death, I put that on Amazon because I couldn't afford then to print another load. And so this one is available on Amazon, and you print on demand. And it's perfectly fine as a book, but I felt that was the only way. The third one has yet to be released because I was writing these books, and I suppose I realised that kids were not reading in any great number as they used to, and I was aware that they weren't reading to the what shall we say? It seemed the books like the David Walliams books, which seemed to be about farts and, I don't know, just fecal matter or the lowest common denominator, really. And I just got a bit disillusioned with being because I wanted to write much more adventurous, but with words and phrases and sentences and things that would pull the children up in their education and help them understand English and things. Again, I'm not saying I'm an expert author or anything like that, but I didn't want to write just basic, you know, granny farting in the bath type material, which just seemed to be pandering down to audiences rather than trying to lift them up. So now, so I gave up for a bit. So the third book basically is not yet out. It's written, but it's just not published. Now, I went to Tess Laurie's book launch the other day, and she has also printed her book, had it printed by an independent company. And what I like about this is it looks like a real book, because it is. And it has a dust sheet. And it's printed on, you know, the sort of paper you expect a printed book to be on. It's published, they published it themselves, but they've published it and printed it as if in the real way, as opposed to some of these, the Amazon books. Now, the hardback copies of the Amazon books are quite nice, but you don't get a dust sheet or anything like that. So I'm just wondering what to do with my book. I'm not going to release it on a Kindle. I don't want to put it on Amazon. There is a company called Lulu.com, which again is another corporation, and they do the similar sort of job, but it's not Amazon. And now I'm just wondering whether to go to the expense of making my first copy a hardback like this, beautifully done, because in the old days, before everybody just went to Amazon, your publisher would publish a hardback copy, wouldn't they, initially? It would be a bit more expensive because it's a hardback, and that would be there for, I don't know what, the first six weeks, 10 weeks, something like that, while the initial interest in the book is there. And then later on, it may even be 6 months later, the paperback would come out, which would be a cheaper version of it. Now, I don't know whether to do that. I mean, I want to get the message out as fast as possible. That's absolutely true. But there's also the traditionalist in me. So I'm still trying to debate which avenue to go down. I don't want to release a digital one. I will release an audio version, but that will be much later. Because the trouble with an audio version, especially if I do it myself and don't do it through the Kindle or anything like that, it'll all be on MP4s, MP3s, and people will just be able to, you know, go, oh, I've got Vobes' book here, I'll send it to you on an MP3. As soon as you make anything digital, you know you've basically given, you've lost because people can just copy it and send it over. It's harder to copy, I mean, yeah, there's the second-hand market, but it's harder to copy that. And I'm not overly worried about the money per se. I do need to earn something, being demonetized from YouTube. And the message I think is important to get out. Whether the story works and whether my writing is any good is irrelevant, really. It's the message that and the truth bombs that I feel is the important part of it. But anyway, there we are. But I think the printed matter more and more matters more than the digital, because the digital can be switched off at any time. Printed books are harder to get rid of. They're harder to edit once they've been released. And they're harder to find and change. Anyway, they're my thoughts. I'd be interested in what you think. And whether you would want a nice hardback copy, whether you'd be up for that. And whether you'd be interested in coming to events in which the book is promoted and Biggleswick and, you know, talking events, and you come up and meet the author, have a signed copy, have a conversation, and I do a, you know, talk for an hour on the overall subjects and the tranche and writing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, be interested to know if anybody's interested. There may, of course, at the end of the day, be absolutely no interest whatsoever in a bald bloke with glasses, smoking a pipe, trying to flog a book. It may, at the end of the day, be a complete damp squib and nobody's interested. So who wants to go down a path that is a dead end and not getting anywhere? So, you know, that's why I thought it was worth talking to you today. Sorry about the length of this video. I'll catch up with you. And sorry I haven't scared you rigid in this video and told you events going on in the Middle East or Ukraine or all that. I don't do that. I don't do that. I've moved away from the scary stuff and are much more philosophical these days. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.